Good morning. My name is Frank Schwartz. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Public Affairs, and I want to thank you for the second time in coming to meet with Peter Robinson. We did try to have this event on the 5th of November, and as you know, we were waylaid by a storm, so we endeavored, and thanks to Peter, we're back again and absolutely delighted to hear him. This is the second in a series of presentations sponsored by the Canadian Centre plus Alliant on ethics in business, and it's subtitled A Series of Presentations on Corporate Social Responsibility, Sustainability, and Accountability. And we're hoping to offer 7 or 8 sessions this year and continue the series on into the future. Before introducing the person that's going to do the introduction to our speaker, I want to let you know that there's an evaluation sheet at your seat. There are even 2 or 3. Please fill these out and leave them at the table as you leave. These are very important to us. We use your feedback to make our sessions better. Now, in terms of introducing our speaker for this morning, we have Professor Richard Sparkman of Acadia University, who will be making that introduction. And he's on his way up here. Richard is not only a professor of business at Acadia, he's also a board member of Mountain Equipment Co-op, and he'll be introducing our speaker today. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Frank asked me if I'd do the introduction. He said, keep it short. And I figured nobody's going to get up at 7:30 in the morning to hear me, so I will keep it short. But I do have a few comments I want to make. Peter has led Mountain Equipment Co-op for almost 8 years. In that period of time, with his leadership, we have doubled the sales, doubled the number of stores. MEC has prospered through growth and through increasing complexity. If you can imagine an organization that's based in Vancouver with nobody on the senior team speaking French, and then trying to go into Quebec City in Montreal, it is a great deal more complex. And the HALIFAX store adds complexity as well because it stretches the logistical lines literally from coast to coast. At the same time that MEC has prospered financially, it has increased its commitment and it's improved its articulation of social and environmental responsibility, ethics, if you will. MEC wasn't a bad organization when Peter came to us, but he improved us in that area as well. So Peter's management record is proof that ethical business is good business. And I think, well, what I was going to say last month is perhaps the best indicator of what Peter has done for MEC is that we had 180 highly qualified applicants for his job. He's leaving to join the David Suzuki Foundation, and when he announced that, we had 180 highly qualified applicants for his job from a number of countries and a number of industries. That's what I was going to say last month. We have now replaced Peter, as hard as that was, and I think the best comment I can make about Peter's style of leadership is that we were able to replace him with a highly qualified individual that he had developed through his senior management team. So, Peter, the man who walks the talk and makes a profit doing it.
Good. All right. Let's, first of all, who are members of the co-op here today? Oh, man, I tell you. You know, it's quite intriguing because the co-op is now, well, at the end of next year, we'll have 3 million members. That will make it the largest co-op on the planet in terms of membership. So it's not just a Canadian number. 1 in 10 Canadians will be a member. It's also the Canadian business with the most number of shareholders. There's no other Canadian business that has as many shareholders as MAC. And we're also now the 4th largest polity in the country. So there's Canada, there's Ontario, there's Quebec, and then there's Mountain Equipment Co-op. So it's quite an amazing story. And I actually have a bit of a presentation here I want to spend about 20-something minutes on. But I'm actually going to start by looking at today's Globe and Mail. So some of you would have seen today's Globe and Mail. And you would know that MEC is in the middle of a huge controversy right now. We took a very significant step last Thursday, and it's been the front page of the newspapers across the country. It's been the headline item for CTV News and CBC News. So we're in today's editorial. We've moved from the front page of the Globe to page A3 or 4 as of Saturday, and here we are. Here we are on the editorial page. What's in the plastic? It says. If the day of reckoning has arrived for bisphenol A, it has taken its own sweet time. And then it goes through this long article. What is it? And it ends up with a couple of quotes here. What is a retailer to do? Because it talks about the potential harmful effects of bisphenol A that shows up in so many of our products now. Not MEC products, but all of our products. It shows up in the things that we sell, such as water bottles, but it's also the lining of tin cans. It shows up in quite a few areas. So the article goes on, after quoting a number of scientists and reputable individuals around the potential health effects, to say, what is a retailer to do? Mountain Equipment Co-op, a supplier of outdoor clothing and equipment, is clearly conflicted. As recently as Friday, its website was still defending the sale of polycarbonate water bottles. Do these bottles have an impact on our health? We don't believe so. And they talk about what was on our website last Friday. It takes a couple of days, actually, to shift all of the stuff that's on our website. We made the decision to withdraw this product before we could actually rejig the website. And then it goes on to talk about, but then it reversed its position. It decided last week to remove polycarbonate water bottles and food containers from its shelves and said it would await guidance from the federal government. And then it talked around, the article talks around how that came to be. It talked about the discussions we had with our members. It talks about some of the research that we began to do. And then it goes on to say, it quotes from our actual quotation where it says, an increasing concern among some members about the inconclusive science and regulatory uncertainty. What does the editorial then say? Translation, someone must have realized Health Canada is a long way from providing guidance. Although it placed bisphenol A on a list of possible hazards for review last year, it isn't expected to provide even a preliminary view of the product's safety until next spring, and its final report won't arrive until 2009. The plastics industry has accused Mountain Equipment Co-op of overreacting. And here's the final statement. But erring on the side of safety until the government pronounces on the controversy seems entirely responsible. And the reason why I'm going to start with that, because it goes to the core of what this business does. It looks at things in a completely different way than I would suggest that most businesses do, particularly a business of this size. And we actually agonized. We've been agonizing over this notion of trying to withdraw this product off our shelves. And make no mistake, we withdrew $500,000 worth of stock at retail off the shelves just before Christmas, at our busiest time as a retailer. This was not an easy decision to make. And we don't know if we'll actually restock that, because we don't know what the outcome of this review will be. Will it be a regulated substance? So we're actually completely prepared to take this off and absorb that loss to our business, simply because at the end of the day, after much debate on our senior management team, we said, how can we take a position that we were taking that said, we'll wait until somebody proves it's unhealthy before we take it off the shelves? And we said, actually, we have to turn that completely on its head and say, no, we won't carry it until someone proves it's safe. Now, most businesses that deal with these types of substances and products which have a bit of controversy around them would take that former position, which would be to say, and there's a history. The history of businesses replete with organizations that will carry a product even under controversy until it's proven to be harmful, tobacco being the most classic example. So there's not many businesses that would do what we've done, and I think the reason why we've done that because it goes to the essence of how this business is constructed, and that's really what I want to talk about today. So, and I've already talked a bit about the history of the co-op in terms of who we are right now. But here's a bit more in terms of, just to give you a bit more sense of who we are. We have about 1,500 employees now in 11 stores across the country. We have a web store. We have a catalog. We'll hit $250 million in revenue next year, which, by the way, moves us out of a medium business as defined by the Canadian Revenue Association into a large business. Just means more scrutiny for taxes, I think. And as you know, that's another controversy as to whether a co-op pays taxes, so we'll get even more scrutiny. In the outdoor gear market, depending on how you define it, we hold between 40 and 60% of all sales in the country. Now that's pretty unprecedented in terms of how that has come to pass from a little store 36 years ago that was based out of a Volkswagen van in Vancouver, and I wasn't there at the time. In terms of performance, we've been recognized as one of Canada's top 5 most trusted brands. So when you sample Canadians on a regular basis, they will spontaneously say, when asked what are the most trusted brands, we'll name Mountain Equipment Co-op in that top 5. When we poll our members, we have extraordinarily high member satisfaction. 94% of our members will say they're likely to recommend us to others. And in terms of, if you know anything about marketing, that's you would dream for that. We actually don't have conventional marketing. You won't see MEC show up in all of the conventional forms of marketing, such as billboards and magazine ads and radio spots. The best form of marketing for us is two people speaking to each other. One is a member and says to the other, this is really good stuff and this is where you should go. When we poll our members, 67% of them say they trust MEC to advocate on sustainability issues. So think about what that means. With about 2.7 million members at this moment, and as I said, by the end of next year it'll be around 3 million, that means about 1.7 million Canadians trust MEC, a business, to help lead on sustainability. And meanwhile, we've been recognized as the #1 business in the country on environmental issues in an Angus Reid study conducted earlier this year. Now, as was mentioned a couple of minutes ago, I am leaving the co-op to go to head up the David Suzuki Foundation, and that's one of Canada's best-known environmental groups. So I'll make no bones about it. I'm very concerned about environmental degradation and changes occurring to our natural environment. It's one of the reasons why I decided to make this shift. But I'm also a businessman. I am a businessman. And MEC has to make a surplus to survive, and just like all businesses. And the thing is, these days especially, being concerned for the environment and being in business do not have to be at odds with one another. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story to illustrate that. And Rick mentioned us going into Quebec. And we went into Quebec in 2003. We launched our first store there. And when we opened in Quebec, I think we had about 80,000 members. So remember the numbers I've been talking about in terms of membership in this country. It's in the millions. When we went into Quebec just four years ago, there was 85,000 members. Yet by the end of next year, there'll be 500,000. That means we will have managed to attract the 1 in 10 adults that live in Quebec in just 4 years, or 5 years by next year, that it took 35 years in the rest of the country. And that's an incredible penetration, rapid penetration. And I asked myself, well, why has Quebec embraced MEC, a company from the West, so impressively? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that Quebecers are the most active population in this country in terms of practicing outdoor activities. And that obviously helps an outdoor business like us. But actually, I think it's something else. There's a real close affiliation to the values in Quebec for the environment and what MEC stands for. And we see that all the time when we look and sample Quebecers. And I think that when you look, therefore, at MEC's very strong environmental record, and you see these beliefs that are really quite strong within the Quebec population, I don't think it's any accident that we've contributed so strongly to our presence in such a short time. And I tell this story about this rapid growth in Quebec because I think it shows my earlier point about the value you can create if you take a very strong environmental approach to business. So let's talk about some specifics about what MEC has done. From about 1999, we've been working hard to understand how sustainability can inform every aspect of our business, every aspect of our operations. And I don't have time to tell you all of them, but I'll give you a bit of a sampling here just to show you how comprehensive the thinking is. When we design a new product, and remember, half of what we sell is our own brand, 50%, like that pack over there that Frank has today, that is 50% of our sales. And when we design it, because it's our own designers that design this, we don't want it to be thrown away in a landfill in 6 months. So we make things extraordinarily durable, very repairable. We design for the environment. We guarantee the product over its lifetime. We'll take it back, no matter how long you've had it, if it doesn't perform well. We monitor the labor standards of the factories that make our goods, wherever they are, be they in Canada or be they in China. And in fact, ETAG, the Ethical Trading Action Group, ranks us number 1 in Canada for our ethical sourcing and social compliance standards. Number 2 in North America, by the way. We're only behind Reebok in terms of compliance with standards, particularly the ILO standards. With respect to materials, for example, all of our MEC branded cotton clothing is now made from 100% organic cotton. You can bring back your old, worn-out polyester clothing to MEC, and we'll recycle it back into new clothes. We keep packaging minimal. You won't find much wrapped in a plastic shell on our shelves. In Alberta, we buy wind power to reduce our greenhouse gases because power in Alberta, most of the electrical grid power comes from coal-fired power plants. So we said, if we're going to start off trying to find a way to reduce our greenhouse gas emission footprint, then we should buy it, even if it's at a premium, from the wind grid. We use biodiesel here in Halifax, reclaimed from fish waste as part of our energy source. And Denise McDonald, who's the store manager over there in the lime green shirt and the blouse in the corner, was actually instrumental in doing that. In Montreal, our building at Marché Central uses geothermal heat. We went for a high capital cost initially, and we find that we save, in so doing, $100,000 a year off of electrical bills compared to a conventional store. So over the long term, and by the way, that capital cost, which was originally pegged at 10 years to pay back, was done at a time when oil was under $40 a barrel. The payback actually was not 10 years. It's actually 4. So now we're in this situation where we're actually making money by doing that up front. Our plastic bags, if you come into the store and you actually ask for a bag, because about 50% or more, I think it's 60% here in Halifax, don't actually take a bag. But if they do, it's made from a cornstarch polymer that can be composted. Our magazines are printed on FSC certified paper, and we have a very strong community granting program. This year we joined the business organization called 1% for the Planet, which means that we donate 1% of our top-line revenues, not your profits or surpluses, top-line revenues to environmental causes. So if we make $250 million next year in revenues, that will mean $2.5 million goes to environmental projects. Now, these programs can't be developed from the top. This isn't me saying, this is what we're going to do. And this can't even be led by a director of sustainability, because you can't do it that way either. This is embedded all the way through the organization. It's in the performance reviews I conduct on senior managers. It's in the incentive programs that we pay for our management across the organization. And our staff actually care about it passionately. And in fact, most of the good ideas will come spontaneously from different parts of the organization about how we can do this better, which is an amazing way to do this. And that, by the way, is another huge business value. In places like Calgary, where labor is hard to get at the moment, we have a continual supply of good folks wanting to get a job with us. Our reputation does make a difference. And, I would suggest that if you want to see some more of this, you can actually go and talk to Denise sometime in the store, and she'll tell you about it, or you can go to our website and you can find out more about our sustainability programs. And I'm not sure if you know this, but a good sustainability program, the research is becoming pretty persuasive right now, suggests that you can improve your profits on a business by about 38% if you do this right. And as for me, after almost 8 years of working at the co-op, I can honestly say that this is a much more rewarding and interesting way to do business than I've ever experienced at my previous careers before MEC. So I think when you look at what we're doing, you can see that this is part of the fabric of who we are, which is why then if I circle back to this plastics issue again here, because I'm going to do it one more time, you can start to see why that issue would be something that would get intensive debate within the organization. It's just one of those things where you go out there, and I've just, in fact, one of the reasons that we did it is I've just finished this fall tour of all the stores. And we had tried to come in here before, as you know, and we couldn't make it in because of the storm. But I've come back to finish the piece that I missed before, which was the HALIFAX store yesterday, and spend a day with the staff and talk to staff about where the co-op's going next. But as I traveled across the country from the beginning of October up until essentially yesterday, what I do is I typically engage all of our staff in a conversation. We actually pay our staff to come for a meal for about 2.5 hours, and we talk about issues that are of concern to them. It goes back to this notion of it being embedded. And what I heard on the tour this year was a real concern for these water bottles that we were carrying, these Lexan water bottles and this bisphenol A. And then I would go out on the floor and I would talk to members and hear what they have to say. So it's part of this notion that staff feel they have the real ability to actually feed back into the system, as do our members. And then when we go back and we debate this at the management team, this was an intensive debate for the very reasons I mentioned earlier, is that nobody wants to write off $500,000 worth of product at retail. And yet at the end of the day, we made that decision. Do you think it's harmed us? We didn't actually do any news releases on this. In fact, frankly, what we tried to do is be very quiet about it. We didn't actually think that this was going to happen. We actually said, let's just remove this product from the shelves across the country, and we'll put some signage there that says, what we've done, and we'll immediately find replacements, stainless steel, other forms of plastic that don't have the same issues around them that bisphenol A does. And we took it off the shelf on, I think it was Wednesday night last week, across the country, all at once. All of it was removed, packed up, put back in boxes, put in our back stock. The next morning, the stores opened at 10 o'clock, and at 10 minutes after 10, a reporter from the Globe and Mail walked into the Toronto store and noticed this, and within 24 hours, it had happened that we generated this unbelievable amount of publicity across the country. And as I said earlier, it was front page news. It was it was front page news, or at least it was topical here in Halifax as well as it was in Vancouver. We still didn't write anything. We haven't had, aside from our communications spokesperson who was taking hundreds of interview requests, we actually didn't put out anything. We thought, look, we're doing this for the right reason. We don't want to get anything out of this. Please stay away. We just wanted to take this off and educate our members. Well, it didn't work out that way. We did get all of this information back, like this article in the Globe. And again, I'm going to suggest that that wasn't our intention, but if anything, it reinforced that very values-based trust that this organization stands on for making the right decision. And of course, I'm monitoring my email as I'm on the road, and there's hundreds and hundreds of emails that went to our service center in Vancouver, and God bless their souls, they forwarded them on to me. I can't keep up with them right now. And the emails are typically, thank you, MEC, thank you for showing leadership, thank you for the trust you place in what we're trying to do. And I think, well, that just, to me, reinforces this type of thinking. But it's so tough to do. And I when I think back at this and how tough that decision was at the time, and now it just seems like a no-brainer. But those decisions are ones that plague us every day in the business sector. And I'm not quite sure when we're going to change away from that. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit around a way we've approached business, and this is really what I wanted to get to that I prepared for. The bisphenol A sort of took over, and I wanted to tell you that story. But I want to talk to you a bit around how we've decided to approach a different way of looking at business, which is that we've decided to do something where we look out 10 years. And I think this will be a good place to spend the next 10 minutes, and then I'll wrap this up, and we'll see if we have any questions. About 2 years ago, we launched this thing called the Futures Project. And we did this because we really were trying to prepare for the future. We wanted to look out to 2016 and beyond and find ways to think more broadly than typical 3-year plans would look at. And most businesses, by the way, don't look that far out. Most governments certainly don't look that far out. And we set out to answer the question, what does MEC exist to do? Because it's not about selling product. That's not what we exist to do. So early last year, in 2006, we crisscrossed the country for 6 weeks. We held over 30 consultation sessions with members and staff, and we asked them, what is the essence of MEC? Given the various trends, what is most relevant to the co-op going forward? And here we asked them to consider and discuss everything from the demographic shifts going on in this country, baby boomers getting older, to Canadian immigration, the rise of Asian economies, the labor crunch, lifestyle issues like the rise of stress and obesity in children, urbanization, global warming, peak oil. We asked all of these questions because we thought it was important for us to get a sense of what members and staff thought. And finally, we asked, considering all the various scenarios for looking ahead, to what do we aspire? And that really sums up the project. It was about the aspiration of a business, its vision of itself acting in a changing world and making a difference. And we boiled everything down into 3 long-term goals. These 3 goals transcend any business plan or short-term objective we might have, and they'll not change in the foreseeable future. They inform everything we do, from long-term planning to our daily business. And now I had a video I was going to show, but of course we can't do it here. So I'm going to look at these, I'm going to tell you what these 3 goals are, and then we're going to just sort of see what that means. So they are, and the 3 goals, the first is to increase participation in outdoor recreation in Canada. Doesn't sound like a big deal here, but in saying this goal, we want to reverse the trends for how recreation is practiced in this country, particularly amongst youth, and really begin to make a difference about how active Canadians can be. Secondly, we wanted to support the creation and protection of a comprehensive network of parks and wilderness spaces across the country. Again, doesn't sound too radically different from what you think the co-op would do. And third, to foster change in the marketplace towards in environmental, social, and economic sustainability. Now, it's interesting because when I talk about these 3 goals to the staff, I say, if you didn't know who this organization was, and if you didn't know it was a retailer, if you didn't know anything, and you said, there's an organization that says it wants to make people active and healthy, preserve wild places, and be sustainable, you wouldn't know what this business was doing. In fact, you might even think it was an NGO. And they sound very altruistic, these goals. But when I speak to business schools, I ask them to put on a different hat and say, well, wait a minute here. As a business, what does this mean? Well, first of all, if people give up on recreation and if the trends towards obesity and lifestyle diseases continue, then we don't have a market. And if we don't preserve wild spaces, then there's no place for people to practice their activities. And if sustainability doesn't catch on really quickly, we'll be hard-pressed as a business, much less all other businesses, to manufacture our goods overseas, to transport them, hard-pressed to keep our facilities running smoothly, and hard-pressed to manage in communities hit by radical weather events, which are going to come. So in short, when you look out far enough, and this was the reason for looking out 10 years, there's simply no difference between what's good for society and what's good for business. So, and I really believe this shift to a long-term view And as you start to reframe and revitalize the business model, you become much more relevant. We open up our potential for real leadership at a time when it's really desperately needed. And it's not just about finding a couple of new business opportunities in an emerging green market. It's not about selling light bulbs. It's about revisioning our business community into providers of real long-term value to the communities we touch. It's like that old quote, making a profit is like breathing. You have to do it to stay alive, but it's not your reason for living. So really that's my message that I wanted to give as part of this looking ahead. When you take a truly long-term view, the well-being of your business and the well-being of all that is around your business are one and the same. And this is what I mean by resilience. When I talk about resilience as a business, it's the ability to tolerate the shocks that are going to come upon us as a business community, as society, without collapsing. It's the ability to adapt and rebuild when necessary. And when we create this alignment between the interests of business, environment, and the community, we will be far more resilient as a community of people around the world and as businesses in a global market. So let's move from resilience now for a few minutes and talk about risk and how risk is changing rapidly from the way we've always thought about it. Now, in this room, there's probably an incredible wealth of knowledge. There's probably incredibly deep intellectual capital, and there's a lot of clout, a lot of ability to make things happen. But let's face it, this will go back and touch on the story I've just given about Nalgene water bottles. We have, all of us, a tendency to entrenched thinking. And we've been trained to think this way, particularly in the business community. After all, we are now the wealthiest, healthiest generation this planet has ever seen. And business as usual has actually served us pretty well. We understand it, we're already organized for it, and frankly, we've profited from it. And that's probably why I've always felt that business in Canada in particular has a very strong conservative bias. We don't like to take risks. We are most reluctant to change. And as I've been thinking about this entrenched bias against risk and change and comparing it to what is happening in the world, two things happen to me. We need to change the way we look at risk, and in fact, some aspects of the risk we face may be quite different from what we think, which is why I believe business really needs to take a leadership role. So over this past generation, just to give you a sample of how risk has changed, we've seen some sweeping changes that we may not completely be aware of. There's been increasing environmental regulation. There's been judgments like the one against big tobacco that have made it clear that companies are responsible for the effects of their products. There was Enron, which sharpened up corporate governance practices. There's the new movement of socially responsible investment, international campaigns against sweatshops, employment equity legislation that requires companies to respect everything from diversity to disabilities. So there's been a lot of change, and frankly, most of it has been for the better. But too often in the past, business only reacted when social outcry grew loud enough to force this change. And many times, at least in the popular view, business was not the leader. And this has created this really unhealthy, polarized dynamic that now exists. On the one side, there's business, usually portrayed as caring about only its own needs. And on the other side, there's civil society, always in a fight to keep bad business in check, using plenty of fear-mongering. It's not a very flattering view, by the way, of either side in this debate. And in the face of significant climate change, the notion of taking sides anymore is absurd. But this is how we've trained ourselves to think. And I believe it's then helped to create that very short-term mindset that the co-op set about to change by going to the long-term view. So with all the changes we've seen over the past few decades, we've become more and more fixated on what's up close and measurable, short-term results. We plan within a horizon where we feel fairly confident, a year, maybe 3, to avoid the risks of the unknown by thinking short-term, feel safer. And this is one of the things we do have to change, because in our effort to stay safe and count on what's easy to see, we are incurring the biggest risk of all. We're actually compromising our future. Now, you know this as well as I do. If we don't revolutionize our dependence on cheap energy, if we don't rethink our way of providing the goods and services our communities need, we will not be resilient. We'll just be out of business. And we have to recognize that short-term thinking is the riskiest behavior of all. There's simply no time anymore for setting your sights on a few profits in the next quarter. Even Lloyd's of London has said that the insurance industry could disappear because it has miscalculated the risk of climate change. And certainly if the insurance industry falls apart, much of the way we now do business goes as well. And the last thing I want to talk about before I throw this open to a few questions is to impress on you that we have to change. Because some of the risks we face may be quite different from what we think, and that they will badly hurt our ability to develop the resilience I just mentioned. So I've been lately interested in this concept of post-ecologism and how we've come to the point where we're realizing that our world has indeed finite boundaries and that we are fundamentally globally interconnected now. And what becomes clear from this discussion is that many of our institutions, particularly governments, are simply not equipped to create the new holistic worldview we need to develop. Governments are rooted in that short-term election window thinking. They really can't see outside the box. They actually represent the worst of business as usual. And that perpetuates, and I hope there's not too many government people in the room when I say that, and that just perpetuates the dynamic of people campaigning for change using that very strident, fear-mongering terminology, that polarized dynamic I talked about earlier. And where this worries me most is what I've learned about how this affects our youth. There are studies now that show if you cry doom and gloom loud and long enough to an adult, eventually they respond by moving into action. Young people, on the other hand, all the studies are now showing, do not. They actually do just the opposite. They respond by self-medicating, in this case by buying more stuff. And they shut down. The problem is too big, they just give up on it. And that's a huge risk for us. It demands us, the business community, and I'm speaking largely to the business community in the room here, to take that leadership role. The risk is that we can't afford to continue this old dynamic of business on the one side and the forces of social and environmental change on the other with a lot of fear in between. We can't have children growing up in a world clutched by a sense of crisis. We can't obsess about how miserable the future may be. We actually have to begin to build solutions and tell the stories of hope. And it's my belief that the business community, if it can shift to that long-term view that I illustrated with the co-op, is one of the best places for this view to come from. We have the innovation, we have the capital and the global reach to do this. And there's lots of signs of hope out there. We don't tell those stories enough. So when the business community stops waiting to be pulled along and takes leadership on the fronts where our government simply can't or won't, then we'll begin to break through to a new way of truly adding value. And when the business community takes that long-term view, when it defines its best interest as one and the same as that of the neighborhoods and the environment in which it operates, then we'll start to mitigate the risks we face. And when we start using long-term thinking for shared, mutually beneficial, hopeful outcomes, then we will start to build real resiliency for the future. So I want to leave you with a simple thought. In this global economy facing the threats of ecosystem stress and climate change, we don't know exactly what the business model of tomorrow must be, but we do know that change is necessary. So future generations will measure us on the quality and the integrity of that change. So today I'm going to ask everybody in this room and within your companies and within your communities, and more importantly, as a community of business people or as a community in general, how to adopt the best long-term thinking you can, and therefore how to be probably the best ancestor you can be to future generations. So thank you. So I think I have time for about a few questions, and then someone's going to come up and talk about the next speaker in the future. So are there any questions? Yes?
Scandinavia seems to be doing what you're talking about here. They've got government, they've got the people, they've got business all working together. We talked about getting business together, we've got people together, but you don't sound so optimistic about government. And frankly, as a Canadian, I'm ashamed of what our government's doing visiting Kyoto. So how do we get the government on side?
Oh, well, that's the big question. How do you get government on side? I mean, governments, by the way, I used to work in government. So I was the CEO of a Crown Corporation before MEC. So I had a lot of experience in that environment. Two things happen with respect to government. One is that they obviously will listen to enough people who are loud and clear if they come together. The difficulty is that we don't see a lot of that groundswell of public opinion until something becomes really quite, you can't ignore it anymore. So it does need that proactive approach. And secondly, you're starting to see a new generation of political leaders in the country. Not at the federal scene, by the way, which is unfortunate because that's where the real leadership should come from. And by the way, I'm talking about all of the parties right now at the federal scene, not just the one that's currently in power. But you're starting to see a new generation in the provincial level, which is quite intriguing. So you've got at least 3 provincial premiers right now that are trying aggressively, and they're the big 3 provinces, and I'm not counting Alberta in this. The big 3 of BC, Ontario, and Quebec are actually taking concerted efforts to actually do the right thing, and I find that very gratifying. And at the municipal level, it's even stronger. So, and you're actually seeing the same thing happening in the United States. There's more cities than you can imagine in the United States that have signed the Kyoto Agreement at the municipal level. And you've now got states now signing on. So it's ironic that at the end of the day, or maybe it's not ironic, that the political will to do this stuff is actually starting very locally, rising up. Eventually it's going to hit those national and federal levels. It's just taken so frickin' long. I just don't understand it, that it would be that long. Any other, yeah.
I have a question about the next corporate culture. And I know one of the things that a lot of organizations struggle with is making that transition to the place where MEC is now, where you have all your staff on board, the board, at all levels, people, it's just ingrained into the daily business. So could you maybe talk a little bit about how you got to that state and whether it was built in from the very beginning, or if you have any other suggestions for other businesses that are trying to move in that direction?
Sure. I mean, it doesn't hurt that we were an organization that was outdoorsy. I mean, it's got a built-in advantage. But probably the good illustration, and so if you're interested in your business or some of you are from health authorities, so I think there's a couple of lessons for the co-op. The first one is there's a tendency in business to create a sustainability vice president and a sustainability department. And we actually, we didn't do that. So number one, yes, there is a director of sustainability at the co-op, but it's not a line department. It's not a vice president level role. And what that person does is they write the sustainability agenda for the organization. But the people that actually make it happen are all the other vice presidents. Excuse me, at MEC. And they are the ones I talked about earlier where it's in their job description. The first thing I asked the person who started this program back in 2000 was, what's the one thing I can do to make this happen for you? And she said, put it in all the job descriptions of all of the senior VPs and yourself at the organization. And within 24 hours, we had done that. So it's in job descriptions, it's in annual reviews, it's in the incentive programs, it's in pay for performance, and then it cascades down from there. And what I find is that just not siloing it, because what happens typically is if you put this in a department with lots of staff and you create this sustainability departments, God love them in businesses, they've got lots of reports and they're doing the Lord's work. But frankly, everybody else in the business tends to say, well, that's their job. They can do it. They're the sustainability department. We don't have to worry about it. In fact, you actually end up with conflict then between departments internal to your organization. And for example, if we didn't have the very thinking that I've just described at MEC, and we had this issue of the plastic water bottle, you can just guarantee that the buying and design department would have said, no way, this is just not going to happen. But because it's all part of their makeup, there were staff in that department that said, look, we know we're going to take a hit and we've got to do it. The second lesson, so that's the first one, is beware of siloing it, but do get it into everybody's job description. The second one is that for us to start sustainability at MEC, we actually went out at the get-go and we did it from the ground up. We actually brought in some folks to help us, and we actually went and met with all our staff, and the staff actually helped define the program. So it actually came from the bottom up, and then when it got up and it was well articulated with, here's what we should do, we actually said, that makes sense, let's do it. As opposed to, because I don't think you can actually, it would be almost, the co-op sustainability programs would have looked completely different if it had been the CEO said, we will tomorrow have a sustainability program. It just wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't feel the same. So those would be my two pieces of advice for you. Yeah.
Peter, what role, first, do you trust carbon tax credits?
Ugh.
And two, what role do they play in the organization?
Well, we're all going to go. That's where we're all going to go in the next 5 years. That's going to be it's going to be carbon trading, and it's going to happen. I'm going to, rather than answer that question directly because it's going to come, I'm going to say, though, I'm going to sort of approach this question a little differently, and that is to talk about the offsets first, because you can get into carbon trading and all of these other things that are, as I say, they're going to come upon us. But there's a great move right now. There's big business in doing carbon offsets. So that is when you fly, for example, you can get you can pay an extra. What would we call it? It's almost guilt money essentially to offset your travel or things that you can do. And I've actually encouraged MEC not to get too much into that, because what I find is if you approach this, and all of us could be carbon neutral tomorrow if we spend enough money buying carbon offsets. Theoretically, on paper, we could become carbon neutral. The problem is that doesn't change behaviors. So what we've said is that we won't even address carbon offsets or buying any of those things until we've actually reduced our own footprint as much as possible. And it's going to take us 5 years to get this as close to carbon neutral as we can be. And then there's going to be some stuff left over at the end, and we're going to have to do that. But I think that if you get too aggressive up front with buying carbon offsets, you won't actually fundamentally look and change the business you're in. So that's my point about that. Yep. And I think this will be the last question because it's just a. Yeah.
So, Peter, I want to thank you on behalf of the environmental groups in Nova Scotia for the community grants program, because that has benefited our organization, the Nova Scotia Environmental Network, and the Society for Corporate Environmental and Social Responsibility, through funds and product donations. So we're really grateful for that. And we're also very encouraged by the 1% for the Planet program that you're participating in as well, because the federal government is cutting back on environmental and climate change programs, despite what we might be hearing in the press. We know as the environmental community that the federal government is actually cutting the programs, and so for the business community to kind of step in and help fill the gap a little bit is really great. But definitely more needs to happen there. And just to respond to the fellow's point earlier about Scandinavia, one of the reasons I worked as a commercial officer at the Canadian Embassy there, and one of the reasons why Norway, Sweden, Denmark are so progressive on environmental and social policies is because there are more women in government, actually. So I'm curious. That's what they attribute it to, actually.
Yeah.
And so I was curious about gender equality programs and policies that Mountain Equipment Co-op have, and I was wondering also if you could tell us a little bit more about any kind of novel training programs around sustainability, because I'm very concerned that management education today still is really behind. It's not mandatory for business students at the commerce level and the MBA program to learn about sustainability. So I was wondering about how you're training around sustainability, particularly for senior managers, and then also about gender policies.
Oh, God, that's a lot of questions. All right, so let's start with the gender equality. We don't actually have specific programs, but I don't think it's an accident that half of the senior management team are women and half are men. I mean, that was our goal, was to try to, at that sort of boardroom table of the senior management team, to have equality. And interestingly enough, aside from this year, because every year the board of directors at MEC is there's a 9-member board, and there's 2 of the members are here in the room today, over in that far corner, Rick and Karen Miner, who's also from Nova Scotia here, from Halifax. Up until this year, in fact, it was roughly 60-40 women versus men on the board. And I would suggest that for most of the time that I've been actually at the co-op, there's been more women than men on the board. It probably does, to some extent, mirror the findings that you're echoing there. But we don't have any formal programs. This stuff just happens, probably just because of the makeup of the business. In terms of the training, well, we also don't have formal training programs. But what we do have is regular sessions, planning sessions, where the sustainability is as talked about as is logistics issues, and as talked about as where we're going to place the next store. And so what you find is that the level of awareness at the executive team on issues of sustainability is probably as high as you're going to find. It's probably the highest of any business. I mean, I'm astounded that when we do the placement of a new store, that the VP of Retail Operations would actually say, we're going to actually push the envelope this time, and 50% of the power for this store is going to be generated on site. And that's the VP of Retail Operations. That doesn't happen in other sectors. So again, it's just part of that notion that we don't necessarily need those formal programs just because that's the way we've created the people that are in the organization. It goes right the way back to embedding this stuff very firmly in everybody's job description. Okay, that's it for me. I'm going to turn this over, but I do want to say one thing before I step down. This is my last formal public speaking event as the CEO of Mountain Equipment Co-op. And how fortuitous is it that my last public experience as the CEO of Mountain Equipment is also in the city where I was born. So I get a chance to come all the way back and do this full circle before I go off again into my new one. So again, thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Gord Fullerton. I'm a business school prof at the Sobey School of Business, and I'm on the board at CCEPA. I think my notes for the thank you are longer than Peter's speech notes. Well, first off, on behalf of CCEPA and our founding organization, St. Mary's and the Atlantic School of Theology, I would like to thank Peter for a wonderful talk this morning. As a business school prof, like Rick Sparkman, who introduced Peter, we get to talk a lot about excellent organizations. And I think there's no reason why business school profs like Rick and I shouldn't be talking about MEC as an excellent business organization. And Peter's talk this morning, I think, gave us a lot of insight into MEC's practices and why they're such a leader in their particular industry. Secondly, I would like to thank Alliant. Alliant has been a generous supporter of CCEPA and this particular series of ethics in business discussions that we've had this semester, it's an academic this semester, this fall, and in the winter and spring as well. The last question came from Tamara Lawrence, who works with the Canadian Business Ethics Research Network. As CCEPA, we're a partner organization with CBURN, and if you're interested in more information on this particular issue, she's at the back. And she has extra copies of Canada's premier journal on business ethics and corporate social responsibility called Corporate Nights, if you would like a copy. They have a number of events planned for the remainder of this academic year. And I think their annual conference is in May, I believe. I would like to talk about our future events. On January 23rd, 7 o'clock, room 255, the Sobey School of Business, we'll be having John Della Costa, the founding director of the Center for Ethical Orientation. This is an event that we will be hosting in partnership with the Center for Spirituality in the Workplace at St. Mary's University. So that's January 23rd, 7 p.m. At the Sobey School of Business at St. Mary's. And on February 26th, we will have a lunch event. Blair Feltmeet, the Director of Sustainable Development with the Ontario Power Generation Organization. So that's on February 26th. It's a lunch meeting. The place is TBA, but there will be information available on our website. That's www.ccepa.ca. Some other notes. Finally, I would like to remind you, to fill out your form, as Frank indicated at the beginning. We're very interested in getting feedback from people in terms of the success of all of our events. And finally, we will be having a Christmas open house at CCEPA on Friday, December the 13th. December 14th? December 14th? December 14th from 2:30 until 5:30. So we'd hope to see as many people as possible scoot by the CCEPA offices, which are located at the Atlantic School of Theology. And for exact directions, once again, go to our website. Finally, we do have a gift here for Peter this morning, and it is under here.
Better not be a water bottle.
Well, no, actually, the first thing I saw was this, Peter, and I'm thinking, gee, I don't know if that's what we have for you. Maybe that's the solution to your problems. Anyway, Peter, thank you very much. Have a safe trip back. Good luck in your job. Anyway, you are more than free to mill around and have some discussions, and maybe you'll get a chance to have one last question at Peter before he dashes off to Air Canada. Anyway, thank you very much.